all of our usual suspects. So Tony, we've got a dedicated group of about a dozen folks who usually join us on Zoom here on Tuesdays, and then a bunch of other folks who watch us on Facebook and YouTube, or on demand, as I like to call it.
Nice.
Just like HBO tonight, or whenever so strikes them. So welcome everybody, whether you're with us on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, or whether you're watching this tonight or a week from now. Hopefully you'll find it just as interesting and engaging as I know it's going to be, because I've known my good friend Tony Brown a long time, and he's one of the most special, wonderful, and remarkable people I know. And I'm thrilled, selfishly, just to have the opportunity to catch up with him a little bit this morning, because I haven't seen him in a few months. So before we launch into that conversation, just a few words of Torah, because I feel like a broken record saying this, but week after week, it really does sometimes feel like the rabbis knew exactly what we would be encountering in the 21st century when they decided a long time ago what Torah portions would be read on any given week, because sometimes it's so poignant and so acutely speaks to what we're dealing with. So this week we actually finished reading the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, and which kind of chronicles our ancestors wandering through the desert. And we're in the very, very end of that book, and they're so close to the promised land they can actually see it after all these decades of wandering. They're just on the east side of the Jordan River and about to cross the Jordan River into this promised land flowing with milk and honey, as the Torah describes it. And they're wandering, and as they're making their way through, two of the tribes of Reuben and Gad, notice that the land that they're walking through looks like it's really great land for raising cattle. And they go to Moses and they say, "Hey, Moses, listen, we really like this land here on the east side of the Jordan River, and we want to stay here. Like, you guys go on, but we're done. We want to stay here. We want to, set up life here so that we can build pens for our cattle and cities for our children." So Moses, I think understandably, does not like this idea one bit, right? They're all on this shared adventure together, journeying, all the way to the promised land. They don't get to just stop short. But after a little bit of back and forth and some negotiation, Moses finally agrees and says, "Okay, fine. You can build cities for your children and you can build pens for your cattle." Now the rabbis, of course, add a whole nother layer of meaning to this exchange between these tribes and Moses. And they point out the fact that when the tribes ask Moses if they can stay, they ask because they say they want to build, first, pens for their cattle, and second, cities for their children. But when Moses answers them, Moses flips the order of the nouns. He says, "Yes, you can stay here and build cities for your children and pens for your cattle." And the rabbis take that to mean that the tribes of Reuben and Gad valued and prioritized their cattle over their children because they mentioned them first. First, they're interested in building pens for their cattle. Second, they're interested in building cities for their kids. And that when Moses answers them by flipping the order of the nouns, Moses is saying to them, "No, you have it backwards. First, you build cities for your children, and only then do you get to build pens for your cattle," right? That your kids are the most important thing. And I was thinking about that last night and this morning, and thinking how perfect that idea and message is for Tony, because of the work that HOLA does. Because HOLA is really, really, really all about, prioritizing our kids and creating safe spaces for them to nurture them and enrich them in communities that really so desperately need it. And as a result has helped, a couple of generations now of kids, right? To not just survive, but to thrive and accomplish really, really great things. I said very early on, about 10 or 12 years ago, when I started this work and started spending a lot of time with folks in this kind of social service space, that whenever I found organizations that do work really well and organizations who are led by really bright, really passionate people, that those were the kind of organizations that I wanted to spend time with and make sure the temple was in business with. And Ola and Tony are at the top of that list, the very top of that list. We've had a beautiful relationship in many different ways for a long time. So Tony, I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome. Let's kind of get to it. So I was actually thinking also that a lot of folks might not be familiar with Ola, despite the fact that I think you guys have a pretty flashy, in a good way, footprint. I recall a couple of years ago walking down Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills and seeing the window display at Barney's, may Barney's rest in peace, that was all art done by Ola kids. And of course, the LA Phil relationship and the Lakers and all that. So let's just kind of start with, for those who aren't familiar, like, what is Ola?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Rabbi Bo, for allowing me to be here with you. And thank you for sharing that Torah with us and with me. I will tell you this, the same holds true 31 years ago when Heart of LA started to now. We absolutely are only able to do this work because of our partners and the Wilshire Boulevard Temple and the Karsh Center more recently have been such incredible partners to be able to do this work together with. So I feel very blessed to be your partner for all these years. So I love you guys. Heart of LA, it was a response to the riots and really pre-riot activities that were going on in the neighborhood, right? It was 1989 when it started. It was 5 kids and a basketball in the old dilapidated Emmanuel Presbyterian Gymnasium. Yeah. And that's because our founder, my friend Mitch, he felt like he was doing some tenor soloing at the church, and I think he was trying to lead sort of some sort of outreach choir there through work that was seeded out of Bel Air Presbyterian at the time. And it was sort of part of their outreach mission. So there he was at this church, and he like everyone knew in that time, there were a lot of drive-by shootings there at Berendo and Wilshire and the surrounding blocks. And so he would drive in and out and he'd see these kids sort of sitting on stoops, right? You pull, Mitch's, if you ever met him, he's a character. He's fearless in so many ways, ignorant in some. And he would just drive by and say, "What are you guys doing out here? You need to get inside," right? And they're like, "Who are you?" He didn't care. So ultimately, he asked the church if he could just use a room here and a room there and allow kids to be able to come indoors to where they could be safe and be able to hang out. And then he started playing basketball. Then he started to realize, hey, maybe these kids like to do a little bit of art. What if I were to get some art supplies and some friends to bring those types of things into the center? What would happen? It would maybe fill in these empty rooms in this old church that used to have a lot of money in the early 30s, 1930s, and now was sort of the flight happened, right? And it was a lot of barren rooms. And he says, what if we just dust them off and let kids come in here and fill the hallways that way? And so he was going to do that initially as kind of just a weekend program, maybe Saturday, maybe Sunday. But ultimately what happened a couple of years later, I think it was 1990 or 91, some of the kids who've been regularly coming to the center were just up the street at Vermont Vermont near 3rd. And there was an old payphone there. And one of the boys and another girl, Maria, pulled up and we're going to use the payphone really quickly, and gangsters came by and shot him down. And Jonathan is still living today. He's paralyzed, waist down, but he has written a book. He has become a minister, and he's just an amazing young man. His younger siblings have come to Heart of LA and through Heart of LA. But it was in that moment that all of those kids, were rushed to the hospitals and the whatnot, and they called the founder. And they said, Mitch, Jonathan, and I think her name was Maria. Maria had been, shot. Could you please come down here? And when Mitch got to the hospital, there weren't parents around. There were just a bunch of teenagers, beside themselves, wailing away. And Mitch realized, oh my goodness, you know, a lot has been broken here. Poverty has broken the family triangle that you know would ideally exist. The path from immigration to this country and fleeing civil wars had done its number of severing, you know, the connectors, and it's left these gaps to where, you know, who's going to fill these gaps? Our schools weren't able to do it back then, and you know, the parents are hardworking. Maybe there's only one parent there. I guess it's me. And so Mitch said, I'm going to have to find a way to keep Heart of LA not only going, but to add days during the week to be around, you know, kind of 6 and sometimes 7 days a week. So that was the real turning point to where it wasn't just a volunteer movement. It had to become something larger to fill a gap. So now we fast forward to today. You know, we moved 5 blocks east of Berendo and Wilshire, and we're now at Wilshire and Hoover. And we're in 4 buildings now. One of those buildings, now 2 of those buildings really are inside of a park, Lafayette Park. And I came to Heart of LA, I returned to Heart of LA in 2003. And in 2003, Lafayette Park was one of those parks that if you were a family, right, you didn't want to go into.
You don't want to be there.
You don't want to be there. And I thought, okay, I'd look at the existing park building in that day and I'd say, okay, you know, this place could be doing something. And they would say to me, but people can't afford to pay for it. And so our model doesn't allow that to happen. And so I asked Recreation and Parks back then, could I partner with you? And could we provide free programming out of this rec center in the rooms that are empty, which in that day, many of them were. And we did that right away. They allowed that to happen, and we built a Smart Start academic program. And I would say that Heart of LA provides free now, today, free after school programs, academic, arts, athletics, fundamentals in language arts and math and science, visual arts, you know, 30 art classes a week across different mediums, music, you know, big bands, rock bands, world music, and then our orchestra and then an orchestra program in partnership with the LA Philharmonic. And then wraparound support services, counseling, and MSWs who provide counseling support to kids and families, healthy cooking, athletic and wellness, all of these things that really, when you look in impoverished neighborhoods like the ones which we are all in together here, you see a lot of gaps in those systems and a lot of services and unmet needs. And so we try to vacillate around those unmet needs over the years and plug them so that we can do what we feel like is our mission, which is to give kids every chance we can to realize their goals and accomplish their dreams. And I reflect, Rabbi Bo, on the Torah.
Oh, I think we may have lost Tony's video for a minute here. Or Tony altogether. You're back. There you go. You're back. Let's unmute you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think that we try to create a city in this part of town anyways, in the heart of Los Angeles, we like to say, that provides kids with those opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. And it's had us go to interesting places and meet interesting partners and do interesting things. And I think the reason why is because there's no one size fits all, is our belief. You know, you can have a child come in and they resonate with my energy, and you can have a child come in and they run away from me, but they resonate with that person over there, right? Who's into something completely different than I am. And we want to make sure that.
Oh, I think we lost Tony again. Seems to be a morning of slight technical difficulty. Oh, you're back, Tony. I think.
I'm not sure I got kicked off again, but I'm happy to be back, and I hope that gives you a background on Heart of Los Angeles.
No, it absolutely does, Tony. Thank you. Can you give us a sense of the scope, just in terms of like numbers? How many families, how many kids do you guys have at any given time? Do you serve in a, you know, this is not a normal year, but in a normal year?
Sure. Yeah, so Heart of LA serves 2,100 kids and kids primarily, okay, and their families. So 2,100 per year. On campus at any given moment, we have between 500 and 600 kids Monday through Thursday. And then we also provide programming on Fridays and Saturdays.
So you're 6 days a week, Tony? Tony, are you back with us?
I'm back.
Okay.
I'm not sure why I'm disappearing. I don't feel like I have control over it, so I apologize.
That's all right.
But the 2,100 students, and now we've built a brand new arts and recreation center using 47 recycled shipping containers and featuring a performance pavilion. And it's allowed us the opportunity to do more and serve more families. So the goal will be 4,000 every year together with partners out of this space and on this campus.
And so you're doing programming every day but Sunday for kids?
Correct.
6 days a week? Okay.
That's right.
So, I mean, those are big numbers, and it sounds like, right, you know, and I've been there, Lizzie Green just hit in our chat that your space is beautiful. It is unbelievable, particularly the new facility, but all of it. Is it, you know, your model, right, clearly, at least historically, relies on, right, also based on the geography, you know, being kind of this catchment zone sort of between, at least historically, between, you know, multiple gangs and trying to keep kids out of that space. The model relies on having kids physically in your facilities engaging in programming so that they're not somewhere else doing other things, right?
That's right.
So then along comes a pandemic, which radically, you know, along comes a pandemic, which radically changes the ability to do that, right? So how has this whole COVID, you know, landscape changed and affected, you know, what you guys do every day?
So since the COVID crisis emerged, what we had to do right away was repurpose our staff and volunteers in a lot of ways. So I'd have my teachers continue to teach, and those classes would all go online, right? So they would teach the same art class. I was in an art class last week, for example, and we had 36 students all doing art making with it again. Sorry, I'm going to try to connect another way that perhaps might be more stable.
Okay.
So I appreciate your patience with me.
Of course, we'll give you a second.
Great, thanks.
No worries.
It's interesting.
This is testament to my love for Tony, that I'm this patient with him.
We will not give up here. Okay, here I am. Let's see.
You're even better looking in that photo.
All right, let's try this. Let me unmute you, Tony.
Great. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, super. So essentially, we repurposed staff. So we had week one, we had our classes back online, be it a visual arts class or a music class or a math class or language arts. And what we found, obviously, were what we all would imagine. So many of the kids we serve did not have, internet in their homes, or let alone laptops to be able to do homework, or computers for that matter. What they were trying to do their homework and their papers and essays on were mom and dad's mobile phone. So, oh goodness, that didn't work out so well. So we actually had to spend time taking our other staff who were not teachers, but were coordinators, and they would literally call every student and parent every week and do wellness check-ins. How are you doing? What do you need help with? And what we learned was that by week two, over half of our families had lost their jobs, the breadwinners in those households.
Wow.
So we realized, oh my goodness, we're going to need to have to liquidate the little bit of funds we had for emergency services to help there. What we also learned was that many of our kids, did not have access to the internet, so they would require some sort of IT support. So our science and technology director provided 24-hour, if you will, IT support. We had our coordinators calling families and helping families register for free internet that was made available through AT&T and Spectrum and sign them up. But that's a gargantuan effort because the process to do that took, in some cases, 40 minutes to more than an hour to get a family logged on, right? Then we had to open up our center and liquidate every single piece of laptop or portable technology that we had and distribute that. Because while LAUSD was coming around and providing laptops to their students, we have a number of kids who are coming from charter schools, right, around the neighborhood who did not have that same benefit. So just to give you a perspective, Heart of LA has kids coming from over 90 different feeder schools. Many of them living, many of those schools are in and around Wilshire Boulevard Temple and Heart of Los Angeles. We're in one of the most densely populated areas, as we all know. So lots and lots of kids coming from lots of different schools, needs and accessibility to resources varied wildly. So we just focused on who doesn't have what. Let's sort that out. And I'm happy to tell you that by the end of 6 weeks into the crisis, we had over 800 families all online with technology and in our classrooms, online virtual.
Wow.
In addition to that, what we also realized from the weekly wellness check-ins were that our families, again, were losing jobs, but they were food insecure, right? They were, their rent had become less stable than it already was. And so we needed those types of services and supports as well. And thank goodness we have Karsh as a partner. And Karsh Center said, we will help you. And it was great because they provided food. So we've been distributing every week out of this campus of ours, food from the Karsh Center to families. And it's always packed, always lined up. And over the last several weeks since the crisis began, we've been able to leverage some fund resources and this food to provide over $90,000 worth of food to the community here. And since the majority of the families we serve, 90+% live in poverty or higher, that was extraordinarily meaningful. Basic need, to have that basic need.
I want to go back to the first thing you said when you mentioned that more than half of the families you serve were experiencing or are experiencing unemployment, and that you guys were able to liquidate some emergency funds to help them. So you guys were actually able, I'm assuming if the money's gone, to actually provide some financial assistance to those families? Because ordinarily that's not something you guys do, right?
Correct. There's a swath of things we don't ordinarily do. we definitely do not.
All bets are off. We all know that, right?
Yes, I mean, things were upside down, but we repurposed our staff to be able to meet the unmet need in this moment, even though we didn't have the expertise, because we looked around and we realized, oh my goodness, if not us, then who? And we didn't find enough supports there. And our families were reporting how overwhelmed they felt about, they knew that there were free resources that were available or different types of systems that they could enter into to receive supports. But we actually needed to allocate staff and dedicate staff to sussing those resources out to realize how, what's the queue on those systems? Have they run out? Have they expired? And we're constantly using staff to do that, to help our families get to it with the limited number of hours our families may or may not have in and around now odd jobs to make ends meet, to put food on the table for their family and pay their rent. Right? Because so many of the families in our neighborhood are undocumented, and therefore, they initially did not qualify for government resources, emergency resources that were made available. So we ended up having to utilize our community and parent resource director, our volunteer coordinator, her team, other coordinators and staff positions to really get around basic service provision to our families, so that we could ultimately have our families stay on an educational path with us, when we deliver those classrooms, right? So that was a big deal. And then we also serve kids who are first generation, first in their families, to go off to post-secondary educational opportunities in colleges and universities. And like all the communities, I think, in this vulnerable neighborhood of ours, we had a number of deaths due to COVID amongst families. We had kids who were in college that we were helping to support with scholarships, who would call us and say, I just lost my father or my mother, and I don't know whether I should come back from home, come back home, and, or I don't know if I should drop out of my schoolwork, my classes. So, there's just a wide range of issues that Heart of LA found itself having to deal with. And we relied upon the support from the Carr Center, from Dee Hirsch, in addition to our own resources, to try to meet these needs in these uncharted times.
You mentioned, speaking of kind of addressing, maybe new or unexpected needs, right? This idea of technology and how you were able to sort of leverage your own internal IT staff to help your families, and also leverage the physical equipment you guys have, and then obviously connect people with some of the free internet issues. I mention it because it's been a reoccurring theme, I think, in not all, but many of the conversations we've had, over the past few months, that this whole crisis and quarantine and isolation and the understandable and necessary pivot and reliance on technology has maybe further widened and certainly highlighted the delta or the gap between those who have access to that kind of technology and, even at the most basic level, and at a higher level, we experienced this morning, right? A stable internet connection, right? And those who don't, right? And all the services and opportunities that are being provided by LAUSD, by you guys, by many, are only as good as a client's ability to access them, right?
That's right.
So even with the 800 families, even with that, are you still finding that there are folks who aren't able to connect with you?
So yes and no. We're not networked in a way that says, if you have a need, come to Heart of LA and they'll fill your need if you're a new family that hasn't been a part of our programs and services. Although summer has allowed that opportunity for us to be able to reach some new families and get them into the pipeline of being able to access these additional services. So we hope that will continue to grow. But the reality is that with the resources that we have, given the economic crisis that is here for the families, that we serve now, and will certainly probably be, with many more people throughout the city, there's not enough resource being shown and thrown into this neighborhood. But we are showing that we can certainly get emergency need and aid out to families in this community. But we need more resources to be able to do it. We've got enough money in the tilly, if you will, to try to do this for the next 7 or 8 months. But without more funds, I'm not sure we can talk about expanding that in this moment.
I wish I thought that this was going to be over in 7 or 8 months, but I think most of us are pretty sure it won't be. So, we're kind of dancing around this and some of the ways that you guys have pivoted and expanded your offerings. Has this whole situation and crisis uncovered additional areas for you guys to serve clients, additional areas of need?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. It's probably made us focus even more on the educational inequity gap that is now widened by this crisis. And there's a real need for us to double down in that space as a result. So what I mean by that is, my kids, for example, my own children, Penelope and Emory go to what would be considered a wonderful public school system where we live, and it's public. And so when they go to school during this crisis, they only saw their teacher one time in all the weeks, live on a Zoom like we're doing today. Only once. And you can imagine the lack of quality that was provided to our home. Now, I used to be a teacher. I'm not qualified to teach in today's day and age.
Yeah.
My wife assists in a preschool, bless her heart. And, wow. And so we're talking about little to no support for our kids from our school system there. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for the families that we're serving who face far worse crises in their homes to have little to no educational supports. So there's an absolute need for Heart of LA to provide language arts, math, homework support, right? And keep these kids advancing, because my good friends go to Loyola High School, or my good friends go to Brentwood or Crossroads or Harvard Westlake. And the next morning after the schools closed down, they were in their classrooms online, almost doing a regular school day. You could barely recognize the difference, right?
Well, yeah. So
that's really where I think Heart of LA is at its strength, is being able to fill classrooms of kids who've been left out and left in the dust, if you will, further so in this crisis. So we need partners who are great at delivering food. We need partners who are great at helping families navigate rent crisis issues. We're working with Neighborhood Legal Services, among others. We need those supports too, because our families need those supports, Rabbi Bo. I mean, I think, that's to your question, those needs are absolutely huge and prominent right now. We have landlords taking advantage of families left and right. I remember one of the emergency need requests that came in early in the crisis. It was, you guys might remember when it first started, it was really, really, really cold. It just so happened that the first couple weekends. And so we have landlords, not fixing the heat in their buildings, because they sort of looked ahead and said, we're not going to get any rent, so we're not going to fix things, right? So that predatory ownership has been occurring. And so there needs to be widespread support for families who are going through that and fighting that, right? And now with the heat, it probably works the other way. So all this to say, we know that there's those kinds of supports that are needed. We'll try to fill that void, obviously, now while we're all in our homes, and we're not able to safely be in spaces. But the minute we're safely able to be in spaces again, Heart of LA needs to continue to double down on the educational inequity gap that is now widened.
So that right there, right, educational equity gap, has, without even realizing it or articulating it in that way, has certainly been on my mind, if nothing else, in the last 24 hours, right? Because probably, right, this morning, I'm just looking over here on my study, this right front page of this morning's LA Times, right, LAUSD is not going to be opening and will be closed indefinitely. And I guess an observation and a question. The observation being, to the dichotomy you already drew between your own kids' school experience and others, right? I think about the same thing, knowing that, at least at the moment, maybe not all, but the vast majority of private schools are planning to go back, and imagining, what does that look like in a city where basically you have a society in which if you pay $25,000 or $35,000 a year to go to school, you get to go to school 2 days a week, 1 week on, 1 week off, every day, whatever. And if you don't get to go to school. And not only do you not get to go to school, you're not even going to get to see your teacher on Zoom, or infrequently. And the further widening, I think, I just imagine, of this educational inequity gap you speak of, that will cause. And then also just what the continued closure of LAUSD, maybe the opportunities it creates for HOLA, but how that because I'm sure it dramatically potentially affects, how you guys are planning to serve kids and families.
Yes, so our model is going to be able to, my view is that our model is going to be able to survive. That's the good news, because we have credentialed teachers, we have aspiring credentialed teachers, and we're teaching really to the content standards in critical subject areas that are necessary and able to help kids progress through school and get to grade level and beyond, and ultimately go first in their families to colleges, right? And be qualified enough to be able to do that. So our model, the way our after school program and wraparound support services are structured, allows that to happen. The problem is that the larger after school providers in our city and across our state and really across our country, those folks really aren't set up to do that. They are set up to supplement on school campuses what schools are doing or not doing. So oftentimes their budgets are small because they're only a portion of what a child fully needs to be successful in the city. Kids need whole child supports, which most after school programs are not actually able to provide if they're doing that service in schools. So community centers and centers in cities are going to be extraordinarily invaluable to providing the wraparound social emotional support, plus I think also academic supports as well, in order for us to help bring that equity gap, closer together. But it's going to be a formidable challenge, but it's one that you have to have that structure, in my view, to be able to do it successfully at quality and do it well. And we need more money in the system for youth in our city to be able to do that. Instead of spending $200,000, $300,000 to incarcerate a juvenile in our justice system, we should actually spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to prevent them from going into those systems in the first place, and support organizations and centers to do this kind of work, because that's about what it would cost to do it really well for kids who are otherwise would be left behind. And so I think we need to influence policy. Maybe we'll get behind a ballot initiative that allows for a youth services office to be developed in the city of Los Angeles, so that more funding, public and private, are allocated to preventing kids in our city from going into juvenile justice in the first place. And keep in mind, I talk about juvenile justice because when I look at LAUSD, one of the largest school systems, in the country, we see how many kids of color those schools serve. And our charter schools in our neighborhoods as well. They serve people of color who are of low income. Most of the students that go to those through our public school systems are lowest income students, right? And they're the ones who are going to be suffering the most. And they're the ones who are obviously going to be touching and embracing crime more easily because it's in their neighborhoods without the ability to prevent it from being so, right? And there's people who are preying on our kids and saying, I bet you don't feel connected to your community. I bet you feel rejected. These are all things our teens have been telling us since the crisis began, is that we feel rejected. We feel, once again, that we're living in shadows. No one cares about us. We feel less safe. And so we need centers and money invested into prevention centers and caring places so that those kids feel like they are connected and they do have hope and promise. And that's what I think we need to be doing as a society to make our cities stronger for kids.
Yeah, so in that vein, and I know, what do you imagine, because you are on the front lines with kids every day, what do you imagine, again, back just thinking because it affects the largest number of kids, the LAUSD closure, what do you think that's long-term going to do to our kids?
Well, I must say I had a little bit of hope when I looked at the LAUSD closure. They promise to make sure that they have teachers in virtual classrooms every day, doing attendance and tracking students and doing some of the things. So on paper, they're making a commitment to do that well and do it better. So if they can do that well and do it better, I think that will really help. in these times. I think it will help on the equity side of things, you know? What I think long term is that, yeah, I agree with the, you know, I see the pediatrics, you know, research that's been done to say that keeping kids away from the socialization aspects of school is more harmful than perhaps the COVID crises. And that's probably, I agree, that would be true. The only thing I worry about is, you know, many of the families we serve in and around Wilshire Boulevard, Temple, and Heart of LA's campuses are living, as we know, on top of each other, multi-generational in apartments. And God Almighty, let's not carry that home and lose more families. You know, that's just as devastating in my mind. Kids will not be learning if they're losing family members and become thrust into the breadwinner position within their household. You know, so, you know, there's a balance here. I would ask us all to wear masks and stay safe. I think we should have a more robust fall with teachers who are fully engaged with minimum standard requirements so that at least we're all going through that together. I get it that the private schools are going to bring kids back onto campuses socially distanced in spaces that are hopefully, you know, large enough and nice enough and safe enough. But I don't have a crystal ball to know. I don't like seeing the chart rise in cases, you know, as someone who's running a center, it's hard for me to like, come on back, everyone. You know, Heart of LA will do a hybrid. You know, we'll do virtual online classroom for fall. And then we will try to bring kids and families back on one-on-one basis, which actually we're doing now, socially distanced, for one-on-one support when it's needed in person. We'll also try to use outdoor space to do some socially distanced, safe athletic activities. We'll do walking tours of the neighborhood for our art class so they can do historic art tours. And they'll do some art making from their homes, but we'll gather as safely as we can. So these are some of the ideas that are emerging to be able to come back into space every now and then so that we can see each other in person. But we absolutely do not want to be a contributor to, you know, the line going upwards for our families.
Absolutely not. Right. Lots of obviously competing values to try to balance for all of us as we navigate all
of us.
I've got a bunch more questions, but I know some other folks do too. I know Gary had one in the chat a few minutes ago. Also, Gary asked if you guys track success in your kids post-college and beyond that into the workforce employment.
We do. So we're somewhat nascent, but we absolutely do. So the good news is we have over 90% of our kids are actually first generation kids are matriculating through college over the last 5 years. Over the last 2 years, the number's getting into the upper 90s, which is fantastic. So they are graduating. We stay with them. We actually do alumni retreats and all-day conferences and seminars. And we call our alumni kids who are in college, okay, and beyond. But they're full-day deals. We do it usually at a college campus. I bet you one year we'll ask to do it at Wilshire Boulevard Temple and Karsh Center campus. It's so beautiful.
Absolutely.
It would be incredible because our kids love returning to the community from all of these different colleges around the country. It's really a phenomenal day. I always go, and it's the winter reunion that I think is the best one. And it's just power packed with resources that we feel like can maybe help the graduates based on tracking surveys that we receive from them. You know, these are the things we need help with. We try to bring in professionals from a variety of different industries to speak to them about, you know, what the next step can look like for them and what the pathways look like. And all of that's extraordinarily important. We also, because we scholarship them, many of them, matter of fact, this year we hit a milestone. We have just granted over $1 million thanks to the Ermis family. They have been so generous as well to our community and support one of our largest scholarships that we have.
Proud to have that one in common.
Yes. Oh gosh. You know, we're all so proud of we're grateful for them, and we are proud to be able to do the work together with them to get that money into these students' hands. And it allows us to continue tracking them to answer that question. So we know how they're doing. We have kids who are buying their first homes, unbelievable, in South LA and San Gabriel Valley. And so we're seeing the success of the work that we do. And I think I would pinpoint a story that doesn't flow to the very top like that, because this is the world I live in is a little bit more around this. There was a child who started off with us in second grade in our Smart Start Elementary program. So we gave her the fundamentals in language arts and math. Most of her life, she's lived in and out of homes, her own home, on the streets, on a sofa. She made it through Heart of LA through like her freshman year in high school. And she finally just said, I'm done coming to Heart of LA. And as a matter of fact, she met a guy who was in the military, and she ended up becoming a teen mom out in the valley. And one would say, that's a horrible story. Why are you even talking about that story? Well, 4 years later, seemingly she disappeared, right? She comes walking into my office. Her name was Marilyn. She said, Tony Brown. I said, Marilyn. And she's holding her maybe 2-year-old daughter, I think at the time. I wanted you to meet my daughter. And I'm like, Marilyn, how are you? And I'm always remembering like the prodigal son story. I feel like we've got a lot of those over the 31 years. We have a lot of those too. But she came back and she said, I just want to let you know that even though I left Heart of LA's never left me. And I've entered into nursing school, and I want the best for my daughter. And we have an apartment, and I'm working, and I'm going to get my nursing, certification. I think it was maybe a year later. And I wanted to let you know that Heart of LA is the reason why I knew I needed to return back to school and stay on this path. So there's a number of stories like that, to where we feel like, my gosh, we lost them. But then you find out some years later that you didn't lose them at all. You made a much larger impact than what part of the pipeline that helps prepare these kids to have the best life they can possibly have amidst the challenges that are here too. I lose it. Everyone's frozen. I don't know.
You're frozen on your system.
Am I frozen on my system?
It looks that way to me, but you haven't moved. Raise your hand, maybe. Now you're moving. There you are.
How about now?
You're
Great.
okay now.
I'm
Rabbi,
so sorry.
I'm not sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. And where did I leave off? Did I finish Marilyn's arc for the moment?
Yes, you have.
Okay,
All right.
great.
Good here now. I hear everybody again.
Thank you.
Apologies, everyone, and thank you for your patience with our Tony. We need your IT guy out here to make a visit.
Well, we need to finish probably our IT hookups clearly in the new building.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Any other questions while the technology is working? We have a couple minutes left.
You have, in essence, become totally surrogate parents for these children from all ages. But the main question is, what has happened to the parents? What is the involvement of the parents of these children? Because I have a horrible impression that parenting has become difficult at best and ignored at worst, from the school age kids to any age kids, due to the pressures of employment and all the other issues that socially involve them. But what do you see on the part of the parents? You have these kids you've adopted them in essence. Where are the parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can tell you, I've been with Heart of LA for so many years that I can tell you it's gotten a lot better. But here's why. It's sort of why, how does it get better and why does it get better? You know, in the early days, the parents were absent. They really were. And I think it's because they were hardworking or they were split and broken. And so it was hard. In more recent years, we've all made a point of emphasis to say it is critical for the kids to be successful to have parents, you know, involved and engaged. And I would go visit some of the neighborhood schools, and I would see very little parent involvement in those schools because they didn't trust systems. They didn't trust the school system. In some ways, they didn't trust it because the systems were just too large, and they weren't able to personalize the experience between the parent and the principal, or in this case, in many of our large public schools, you know, the many vice principals. So I would go to do some outreach or to participate and to share, and I'd walk into rooms where there were very few parents in them. And these were optimal times, you know, chosen optimal times to reach parents, right? And the attendance just wasn't very good. So I realized that for an organization like Heart of LA, we would need to convene the same thing at our place. And I'm happy to tell you that every quarter, we have parents deeply engaged in knowing what their kids are doing, how their kids are doing, and how as a community we're doing with kids, at least quarterly, if not monthly, across some of my almost all of my academic programs. We also have healthy cooking classes here for parents that are now parent-led. At first, we were teaching them, but then we taught the fishermen how to fish, and now they teach. It's wonderful. We have parenting classes that are offered across programs and services, and they're well attended. So there's some wonderful examples of that, but it all is based around trust. We become a center of trust for our families, and that's why they come. And the minute we break that trust, we're going to be just like the other large systems that exist that have, you know, been an unwelcoming place for our parents, as spoken through our parents' voice.
Tony, thank you so much. Thank you for just being the menschy, articulate, caring, thoughtful guy that you are. I know there are literally tens of thousands of families out there in our city who wouldn't be in the position they are were it not for you and decades of tireless work that you've put in, because more than anything, you care a lot, and that shows. So we're all lucky to have you doing this sacred work, really. And we're lucky at the Temple and at Karsh to have you as a collaborator and a partner, and most importantly, a friend. So thank you for making the time this morning. I look forward to being able to see you in person when such things are again advisable. And thank you everybody for joining us and for being a little patient with our glitches this morning. We'll get it all figured out by next week.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Bo, and thank you, Wilshire Boulevard Temple and Karsh Center. It's been amazing to be able to be your partner in doing this work together. Many blessings to you to keep doing it, okay?
Likewise. All right, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.